Yeah, Commissioner Sakovic, can you hear us?
I hear you fine now, yeah.
Ooh, fantastic. We can even hear you louder than before, so that's perfect.
Oh, excellent. Good.
All right. Okay, we're going to get started. We'll come out of our closed session. All right, and we had 2 items that had been tabled.
I'll make a motion that we bring agenda item number 20 and number 34 from the table.
I will second that motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 That's unanimous. All right, we will start with agenda item number 20.
We want to discuss and vote on this, or?
Well, do you want to, I thought you'd maybe want to summarize since it was your motion, and then we can open it for discussion before we vote. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you. So this agenda item is on there to continue the discussion that we've had when it comes to elections and finding a way in which we could possibly find some resolution that will give comfort not just to the election process, but to the citizens as well as we move forward. As you're well aware, during the Board of Canvassers, I asked for the CBRs, those and the election materials, wasn't able to fully access them at the rate that I wanted, and so that became problematic, for me. And then, and you heard that whole discussion as we were in the Board of Canvassers meeting. During that Board of Canvassers, we talked about without a vote, but we talked about what could be done and how we could move forward with doing some sort of review, statistical review, whatever the case may be with that, without making a decision as we were in that board at that time, the Board of Canvassers. And then we went into the commission, and as a commission, we voted unanimous that all 3 of us were on board with going through an RFP process, looking at what we could do. Some of that has been going on a little bit unbeknownst to me, that I didn't know exactly what was being done on there. But in the meantime, in looking at other states that are doing, some similar things, it was brought to my attention that we should do a statistical review first, so we don't spend lots of money in a possible RFP that goes out there on a big scope basis and looks at everything, which would cost us and the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. And in doing that, I put this agenda item on there so that we could do a really scaled down approach and look at what needed to be done instead of just a broad brush stroke, which would again cost us a lot of money to go through and see if there was anything on there. And if it comes back with statistical review that everything is fine, then we could just kind of move on from there. And that was the intent of putting this on there. This morning, we get an email from our lawyer that has represented us through the trust regarding a lawsuit that was going on. I realized this was already published and already on the agenda. And there's some inaccuracies in here because some of the email says that why would we want to go back and look at the 2020 elections? That's not the case. It says 2020. It's not. It has nothing to do with the 2020 elections. And I think that they're, kind of looking over, he was looking over those and saying you shouldn't be going back, and this lawsuit's going on in regards to that, and kind of crossing the lines with it. And so there's some legal questions that have come up that we discussed in our closed meeting about where we're at on a legal basis. I feel like, and of course commissioners can tell me differently, I feel like there is still an appetite to move the ball forward amongst commissioners. And if I'm wrong, please state differently. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's an appetite to move the ball forward, but being hit with this legal analysis, which we'll have to kind of work through, causes some questions for us on a legal basis in which how should we step through this without putting ourselves at risk on a legal basis. And so I do think that we need to. I mean, there's so much. This is such an issue that we need to get to the bottom of and work it out and find a way to do it. But it'd be really hard for me at this point in time, looking at the legal ramifications to it, to actually just jump on board, even though it just came this morning to us. There are some things that I have read, and I need to state this over and over. There is a big difference between what can be given out publicly and what can be given out to an elected official or a member of the Board of Canvassers. And I think sometimes we move those back and forth and think that, that the commissioners, in my opinion, are just equal and our Board of Canvassers are equal with the public in information. That is not the case. I sat down in the office for about an hour or two with the clerk's office and looking at information that in some cases, when you read down through the law, it says, you can't be showing out anything. But then you have the Board of Canvassers, which should be given information. And there's a lot of problems, I think, when it comes to the law. How some of this might ultimately be ferreted out and resolved might be legislative action. But again, going back to some of the discussion, I do feel like my fellow commissioners want to find some sort of resolve to this in a way that gives us the ability to look at it and what we can look at, what we should be able to look at. And then there's timing involved because we're not in the canvassing process anymore. And I get that too. And so with that, I am prepared and I'll just state this without making it a motion. I'm prepared to continue this item without date as we work through the issue.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lee. I think I agree with you. I think you stated it very well. It is frustrating, like on the 11th hour, so to speak, this morning to have received an email and to finally have received the judge's opinion on a court case that we've been in, and that opinion gives us ambiguity. Like you, my concern is that if we were to approve this resolution today with ambiguity still in the system, that we would be right back in court. And then in the end, we wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't have accomplished anything. We wouldn't have accomplished what we set out to accomplish. And so I agree with your conclusion that continuing this without date gives us the ability to possibly get an appeal or a better clarification or a better legal opinion in any of those above situations, which would allow us to then move forward with certainty rather than moving forward and then getting stricken down and having no result in the end, which to me is the worst case scenario. But one of the things that we can do while we continue this until we have a further resolution, one of the things that did come to light is that we are still moving forward on our RFP, and that I was encouraged to hear that Commissioner Sakovic and our legal team, our elections staff, and our purchasing agent have all been actively moving forward in that area. You brought in some more information that you'd contacted others who have done a statistical analysis, which will help narrow that scope, and I think that's very helpful. And so I would tend to agree with your assessment. I think continuing this until we can answer those legal questions is best, because I think if we passed it today, that it would just end up in court tomorrow and we would literally be nowhere. So I think your approach is probably the best one. And Commissioner Sakovic, do you have anything to add to that?
It's only because this is a court process. It's not concluded for the very similar request, that we need to see what the courts will come up with when they finish all of this, and to see how it will affect what we're attempting to do. And yes, this is not about 2020, this is about 22, and what we're trying to do is look at what we should have the ability to do as board canvassers, not for public consumption, but what our authority to do. And so that's why I'm anxious to wait and see what the courts will produce. That's about it.
I think you cut out a little at the end there, but I think the basic gist was similar with Commissioner Lee's.
Yes, I was agreeing with what you and Commissioner Lee had outlined.
Okay.
That this is currently now in the court process, and we're waiting to hear the results of the court effort.
Okay. Yeah, we're waiting to see the results in the court, but we'll continue with the RFP process, allowing us to continue with
Yes.
yeah, perfect. That's what I thought I heard. Thank you.
Yes.
I think before we entertain a motion on this, should we have several people here to comment? We'll open it up for public comment at this time. Our standard rules public comment was it 2 minutes or 2? 2 minutes is 2 minutes. So if we had anybody that wants to comment on this particular agenda item, that's agenda item number 20, if you want to come forward at this time. Yeah. Just state who you are for the record.
John Johannesmeyer from Pleasant Grove.
Thank you,
So obviously, election integrity is a huge issue, both on the U.S. level, the federal level, state, everything. And anything I think we can do to help move this forward effectively as fast as possible, because we know as time progresses on, you lose energy, you lose momentum. And so I would suggest we move expeditiously with this as fast as you possibly can. And I know you have people here that are willing to help out any way they can, you know, to help move that ball forward. This is a great time when you can involve the citizens in this process as well, to help any way that's possible. And I think this is a great initiative. We have to have confidence as citizens that elections are fair, honest, and without reproach. And so this is a great thing to resolve. If there are any, and I don't understand, what did the court say? I'm not privy to that. And another question I would have is, who can access all this data and do an analysis legally and lawfully? If you could address that, I'd be very interested in that too.
We actually have the same question. That's why we.
Oh.
The court opinion will be a public opinion, so you'll be able to get that. And I think that we'd be fine, you know, pointing to that for you. But that's what we can't determine at this time. But that's why we're continuing the item so that it's not dead. We're
Okay,
going to look
right.
at that and then bring it forward.
But in the whole history of elections in Utah, no one knows who can really see all the data? Wow, inconceivable. Okay, definitely need some help. Thanks.
Vince Neumeier from Linden, Utah. So absolutely, yes, proceed forward. And maybe we have to test the courts. Some judges are wrong sometimes. And maybe we need to move it up and see where it really goes. I have a very great concern in that when we established civilized government, we have a vote, and there were processes that were developed to audit and to cross-check, and those are all important parts of having an election that you can trust. But what I see and hear happening now is that we have these machines, and they're like black boxes, and ballots go in and numbers come out, and there it is. Oh, and we can check them. We can run a logic and accuracy test, and we can send this in. And but that doesn't necessarily assuage someone's fear that there can't be some sort of a concern or some sort of a setup where a logic and accuracy test may pass accurately, but when you go to the actual ballots, governed by however many ballots you go through or whatever it is, there isn't some sort of nefarious code in there. So anyway, I'm very concerned that we have lost the idea that we can audit and assure people as best as can be had that the vote is accurate, and we're now turning and saying, we can't look at it. You don't have the ability to look at it. And that just absolutely destroys faith in elections. And we can't have a country where we don't have faith in our elections. A country, a county, a city. Thank you.
I'm Sylvie Andrew. I'm actually a precinct chair for the Republican Party. It was actually a Republican primary that we had. And so I've been involved politically for many, many years. And I'm just appalled that we cannot, as people, we can't do this. I mean, that, we can't look at the voting records and find out, okay, just what happened with that election. Because I don't believe that it was a fair and honest election. As a leader in my party, I don't believe it was fair. And you're saying, so now we have the courts fighting the people on this? So who's in charge of our elections? Is it the courts or is it the people? Because I represent my whole neighborhood, which is, I don't know how many thousand people in my precinct. The people are not getting we're not having a fair treatment of this. This is baloney. We're just getting run around by the courts. And I've gone to committee meetings up at the Capitol and attended where we've tried to get audits. Why can't we have audits on our elections? In my opinion, if we don't have honest and fair elections, we might as well not even vote. This is a joke. We could just have appointed officers to represent us. This is a flipping joke. I want something done. I want to be able, we should have the right to look at the data. And by the way, in 2003, the Republican Party was given the data. They were able to look at it to see what happened with the election. What has happened? Now we have mail-in ballots, and I don't know, there's all kinds of fraud going on, and I'm just not happy as a citizen of this county.
I'm Pamela Allen from Provo. I too have concerns about using the machines. There is just too much possibility for manipulation. And even though they say they're not connected, they have proven that these can be hacked into, manipulated, and there's a lot of interesting things going on, including this weekend. If you're interested, Mike Lindell has Moment of Truth Summit, in which he is going to be talking about a lot of the things that have come forward since his last one last year. Anyway, my concern at this point is that we are coming down on the 22-month deadline, and so what is going to happen when September 3rd arrives, and that's officially, to my knowledge, is all the longer that they have to hold these records. And why do they have to hold the records if nobody can see them up to that point? It makes no sense at all to say we've got 22 months for holding the records and then not have any way to access them to find out that things have gone right or wrong. Because why hold them unless there's a reason that we need to look at them? So that's one of my concerns as well. And I really think that regardless, we need to go to paper ballots that can be counted in their precinct. We can have a total count the night of the election, and we can be watched carefully by both sides, by all sides, and know that things are done correctly. Thank you.
Is there anybody online, Alice? Oh, I do see one hand. Yeah, Russ, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one quick observation as I was looking at the scope of work that was included with today's agenda. The statistical analyses become important things to do, but they're only as good as the assumptions upon which you base those analyses. So I noticed that we're talking about statistical control limits. We're talking about what we identify as a statistical anomaly and what's not an anomaly. And I just want to make sure that provide some input that as this RFP continues to be developed, that not only are we testing the statistics, but the assumptions behind those, and that we're using the best tests to really understand what's going on in the election and not using some predetermined assumptions that might, skew the outcome just as much as anything else. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep, we have one more here in the room.
Cindy Butler. I can respond to that last comment. The control limits are based on common cause random variation, and statisticians rely on that. How much is common cause in order to find these special causes? So it's a tried and true methodology that's been used for decades and decades in many industries to detect anomalies. It's well documented. It's in the literature. It works. I want to respond to someone else who said, what are the courts doing anyway? I looked up I was an expert witness in another case and got on the court exchange system, and so I was able to look up these documents that you've been talking about. And it says in here, for the case that you're referring to, it says the CVR records, which can be requested by the Board of Canvassers, Utah code, whatever the code is. So I just want to point out that I don't think it's the courts that are derailing us. I'm wondering respectfully to our attorneys, our own county attorneys, are you representing the constituents? Are you fighting for us to get what the people want? The people want to see the records. Why are you taking the position of to obfuscate what the court order is saying? Why are you giving us smoke and mirrors and interpreting this differently than what it says? Why are you misleading the people? I think that you should represent the people and fight against whatever system is that's preventing us from seeing this data that's public data. And the request, the RFP, and for the motion that was done for today, it was not the public who requested it. I didn't even know that I was on the agenda. It's coming from your county commissioners. They are not the public requesting that data. That's what this case is about. The case is about a public grandma request for CVR and other election records. That has nothing to do with the agenda item today. And respectfully, attorneys, please fight for us. Please fight for us. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else for public comment? Okay.
I'll make a motion that we table item number 20 without date as we work through the RFP process, continue to work through the RFP process, and clarify on a legal basis where everything stands.
I can second that motion.
Okay.
Just clarification,
yeah.
was that continue without date?
Continue without date.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Before I call for a vote, I do want to clarify that we as commissioners, and correct me if either of you disagree, we want our election staff to know that we know that they work very hard and we support the work that they do, and any analysis would be on the machines and not a reflection on our election workers. Right. Okay. With that, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that passes unanimously. We will move on to the next agenda item, item number 34. A proposal to approve and authorize the commission to sign a resolution regarding the method of providing consent for the appointment of deputies and employees by county officers.
Yes. This is mine. I'm going to read a few things. This is an article that came from, or that was quoting the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. And he talks about inflation. And he says, as inflation continues to increase, so does the probability of a recession, according to several recent economic forecasts. That means more layoffs, fewer jobs, higher interest rates may soon be on the horizon. The median probability of a recession over the next 12 months is about 47.5%, and that's up from 30% in June. Of course, this was written about the middle of July, so it's a little older. According to the Bloomberg survey of economics completed last week. Recessions are officially declared by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which defines them as a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and that lasts more than a few months. And so he also goes on to talk about a big reason a recession looks imminent is because of inflation, which we know, we deal with, even if there are some elected officials in a month's period of time who think that it was zero. We know it's different than that. Last week's Consumer Price Index, the CPI report, revealed year-over-year inflation reaching 9.1%, the highest since 1981. They go on and talk about different banks and their forecasts, and that some of them are forecasting a recession that could occur in the late part of 2022 or as early as 2023. And now I don't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on the title of articles because they're always pegged so that you can get a click status, but I'm going to read this one. It says, ugly inflation numbers make a recession more likely in 2022, economists say. So there's one from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Here's another one that I wanted to kind of point out. And this one is a report by Jamie Dimon, and he is the J.P. Morgan Chase CEO, talking about the U.S. economy. And the J.P. Morgan Chase chief executive Jamie Dimon says only a 10% chance of an economic slowdown that doesn't lead to a recession, while ominously warning there's a 20 to 30% odds of something worse. The banking boss said in a client call that while the U.S. economy is still strong and consumer balance sheets and businesses are in good shape, there are storm clouds ahead. Hiked Federal Reserve rates, quantitative tightening, oil shocks, the war in Ukraine, and the rising U.S. tension in China have pushed Dimon to think that a mild recession has a 20 to 30% chance, while a harder recession has the same odds. So I point to those because I think as county commissioners, it's important for us to be careful. Especially we're talking about taxpayers' dollars, and as we look forward, and the biggest part of the budget is always and will always be a personnel budget. It's what we do. We don't necessarily have a gadget or a widget, but we have services that are there and needed and necessary. And so I took and put this on there, and again to kind of go down through it. The commission has full opportunity and rights to determine, one, the staffing plan, and also the funding levels for it. Now, that comes in a variety of ways. We have, if the standard, if something hasn't been designated differently, the standard operation that we usually follow is that we do that during a budget process, and then during the budget process, we say, here's the staffing plan, and then we also turn around and say, here's the funded positions or the funding for that staffing plan. As you know, today we did open up the budget, and we open up the budget, which always gives us opportunities to adjust and modify, increase, decrease, whatever the case may be. And in this case, in looking at the unforeseen future that is coming here to Utah County, even though, rightfully so, we can say that there are monies now that we're not seeing a decline necessarily in revenue, but there's a forecast for that. The second option that the commissioners have at their disposal is to go through. It's not, and I wouldn't call it a hiring freeze because I think those are the wrong words, but it is just a simple check on the individual, not departments, the individual hires the applicants that take place. There we go. I was looking at Paul. Applicants is the right word. It gives the commission the opportunity to talk more with department heads. It's not saying that we can't go through it, but I think that as we look into the future, walking gingerly through this next little while and into next year as we do our budget process would be advantageous for us to take cautionary steps as we do so that we don't find ourselves going through a process different in which we have people hired and then we turn right around and have to go through a reduction in force by any stretch or means. Now's the time to kind of guide in a careful way. And that's the reason why I put it on there. The process would be that the department head with unfilled positions or anticipation of a position would be able to reach out to Ralph Barnes and say, hey, I'm looking at doing this. Is there support from the commission? And if that's the case, then you just proceed forward as normal. Otherwise, there might be, well, let's hold off or whatever the case may be with at least two commissioners voicing some concern to it. Otherwise, it's kind of business as usual. It's just another step or layer in there. I'm sure there'll be some that will say, well, what about the positions that we already have that we've done interviewing for? And that would be a discussion that we'd have with Ralph and with the department heads as we move forward. And that's the reason why I put it on there. Not a freeze, not to try to stop, but at least have that discussion as we look at the future of what could and might, and in some case, the economists are saying is going to happen at some point in time. We just haven't got there yet, and so it's a step. It's a step of caution moving forward.
As I look at this, I see that every open position that we have, every current position that we have, was already voted on by the commission at some point, actually usually twice, once to add it to the staffing plan and once to fund it. I would like to think that we as a commission, and I'm for sure, me personally, scrutinize every single position before we add it to that staffing plan. I have faith in our department heads and the other elected officials with whom the public elected, and I don't think they're asking for positions that they don't need. And then on top of that, I think we scrutinize those positions to double check that they're necessary. And I think that we're conservative and lean and cautious in our funding. At this time, we are running a structurally balanced budget. I don't foresee in the near future, meaning in the next 30 days, that we're going to have a significant shift. If we do, I think we absolutely could do that. But I think at this time, adding an additional step of approval for hiring will be an unnecessary burden to our HR department, who's already overworked, and to every one of our departments. I think we're on the verge of a critical level of staffing. The sheriff's department works in mandatory overtime because they do not have enough officers. I think and we traditionally shoot to pay under market rate, even at the very best, we're at market rate, but typically we're within 3 to 5% below that. So we don't offer people the best job. And I think one more disadvantage of having to ask for additional approval, I think it's an unnecessary step. I would not be opposed to, as we look at the 2023 budget, look at any position that's been open for a time, possibly defunding those in the 2023 budget if we feel they're not necessary. It was brought to our attention that 3 of the positions that have been open for a long time are in the jail, which we know are absolutely necessary, even though they've been open for a long time, because we have staffing shortages and we can't fill them. The programmers, which we know we have an understaffing problem with programmers because it's hard to compete with the benefits of Silicon Slopes, and commercial appraisers, which are absolutely necessary. We literally just approved like $1 million for a program to try to use a technology to assess them because we can't hire these assessors. So I think the majority of those positions that are long-term openings, we want to fill, and we could fill, and we need to fill, and they're necessary. But I think we already approved these twice as commissioners. I trust that our department heads and elected officials are not hiring employees that they don't think are necessary to perform the duties of their job and of their office. And while I definitely see where you're coming from and would agree with you that we do have uncertain economic times ahead of us, I don't foresee that happening in the next 30 days. And I think that we're trending in an okay place, that this is an unnecessary thing at this time. But I could definitely consider it in the future if I saw those things change. No, Commissioner
And
Sanders?
for my part, I've been working with HR to see which ones are unfunded and have been unfunded for 12, 18 months or more, and what alternatives are being generated to get those positions filled, if they can be filled. I see the same issue in every industry throughout the country, from restaurants to hotels to businesses of every sort. Everyone is having a difficult time to fill positions. And we have talked about this a number of times. So I understand where we're coming from with this. I would like to continue to do some more research throughout the rest of this year and just determine where are we going for 23, because it's been avoided, but we are in fact in a recession. It's been the effects of it has been put off, but we are in fact in the second quarter recession, and that's a bit of a concern to me. So that's why I'm eyeing this very carefully, because the positions that are asked for are absolutely needed, absolutely positively must be had. But again, so is every industry going through exactly the same thing in their various areas. So I'm very, very much aware of this need to watch what we're doing as we grow, and what the effects of the recession will be. No one has the foggiest idea what that will be. So I'm just kind of keeping my eye open on that.
Okay. Just like we did on the past agenda item, we'll see if there's any public comment for this agenda item. I smirk as I say, please state who you are for the record.
Mike Smith, Utah County Sheriff. I'd like to just echo the things that you said, Commissioner Gardner. For us, we have worked diligently to increase our staffing levels. We have typically ran about 27 deputies short in the jail. We've done a lot of things to try to change that, to do better, to promote. So yes, we're feeling the crunch just like every other industry, and like every other industry, how have you seen them try to fix that? Well, wages have went up. From fast food restaurants to you name it, wages have went up. We have felt that in the county. We've lost people. HR did a market study for us, found out that we were severely behind market. That got brought up today in the meeting earlier. I heard gaps, and I think I even heard of that's ridiculous. To me, at what cost is your public safety? As we work so hard to try to provide that public safety, I think it's oversimplified to say it's just one extra step in this process. Anybody that's worked in the county for any measure knows that there is bureaucracy and red tape at every level, and it is a simplification to say it's just one more step. It sets us behind in what we're trying to do and the goal we're trying to accomplish, to bring qualified and good employees to this county to keep Utah County safe. We're talking about elections and doing audits, and I even hear, Sheriff, what are you doing? And again, those things come at a cost. I do not have the manpower to do those things, nor the training in my employees to do those things. So again, to have these concerns and then gasp because there's a price tag attached to it is concerning. But I ask you to not pass this, to work with us. As I'll tell you, as an elected official, I am willing to work with you. I heard this might happen, this could happen. You know, there's a lot of uncertainties here, and what we do know is that we're not in a deficit right now with our budgets. We're not. So I'd ask you to work closely with us, and we're responsible, and we'll understand, and we'll work closely to guard that taxpayer money and do the right thing by it. But I think this is a premature move at this time, and I would ask you not to pass this measure. Thank you.
Josh Daniels, Utah County Clerk Auditor. Let me first speak as County Auditor to some of the economic points that were made, and then as a department head with similar operational concerns about staffing and our needs as a department. So I think Commissioner Sakovich said it well, which is that we are in technically a recession. So a recession would be a receding, a shrinking of the economy. And most economists agree that you measure a recession by looking at economic growth using the indicator GDP, gross domestic product. This is the value of all goods and services produced in the economy. And you look at it on a quarterly basis and say, when the economy is not growing, so negative growth, it's shrinking, and it shrinks 2 consecutive quarters, we're going to call that a recession. And so why is that important? Well, one thing we would not want is a depression. And so what actually ends up happening is the Federal Reserve will intervene in a way in the economy by trying to impact interest rates to try to temper economic growth so that it is smooth and they're able to sort of temper the effect of the business cycle. Because the business cycle, as we learned in the 1930s, when the economy grows really fast, there's a counter pressure that comes in, and then it shrinks, and sometimes really fast, and you end up with a depression. So a recession is much better than a depression, and typically recessions in the past that have been bad, certainly the 2008 recession was really more like the Great Recession. It wasn't quite a depression on economic terms, but it was a significant recession. So we are currently in a very minor recession where economic growth has been negative 2 quarters in a row, which puts us technically in a recession, but it's such a minor recession. The real question is that going to last or what will happen? But all of this is because of the business cycle, which is the economy grows, it collapses, it grows, it contracts. The Federal Reserve wants it to grow and contract in a smoother way so that you don't have radical interruptions like we saw in the 1930s and the Great Depression. So then there was a mention of inflation. Inflation and unemployment can be leading indicators of the risk that the economy is growing too fast, which means the business cycle could set up circumstances that could later lead to a depression. So as inflation goes up, or unemployment goes down, and those two things are usually correlated, right? If unemployment is low, why there's a lot of competition in the market to hire labor. And when that happens, the price of labor goes up, which means the price of manufacturing goods and services goes up, which means you have inflation. And as we know, for the last 2 years, we've had significantly, historically low unemployment. And what that has led to is, no surprise, inflation. And part of that is interest rates have been kept artificially low by the Federal Reserve for so long that money is cheap. If you're a business and you want to grow, you want to hire a bunch of employees and grow your business, why, you can borrow money quite cheaply with low interest rates. And so that's what's happened. And the economy's grown significantly. And then, of course, they've kept interest rates low despite the kind of artificial recession because of the pandemic, because they didn't want the economy to collapse. And so now we're in the situation where inflation is almost sort of out of control. So, of course, the Federal Reserve comes in and they raise interest rates on banks, which raises the market interest rate for borrowing money in the economy, which, of course, then leads to exactly what they want, which is a minor recession, or maybe no recession at all, but they want to temper growth so that we don't get out of control and have a depression, right? So I appreciate the mention, commissioners, of the economic indicators and the conditions that we find ourselves in. And this is important to the county because about 30% of our revenue is based on consumer spending in our community via sales tax revenue. And as we learned in 2008, if we actually have a significant recession and the consumers in Utah County spend less money, then we might see less sales tax revenue. And that could be a problem for our budget because, of course, our budget is based on a projection of sales tax revenue, which is one of the things that we do in the auditor's office is we think about these economic forces, we study them, and we try to give you the best projections about sales tax revenue in the future. Now, the question, I think, of how a recession recession or a potential recession might impact our budget or our revenues really comes down to this question of consumer spending in our local economy and whether our sales tax revenue today and in the near and long-term future are in line with what our projections as a county would be. And one of the forces that's in play here in Utah County specifically is growth, population growth, neighborhoods being built, people moving to the county, people purchasing their goods and services at their local grocery stores here in this county. Certainly big box retailers are moving into this county to serve the population that is growing, that is here in this county. All of that leads to sales tax revenue, which is a piece of our budget. We undertook a significant study on this matter. One of our interns from the BYU Master of Public Administration program, who has an undergraduate degree in economics, she spent the last 4 months studying specifically our sales tax revenue historically, the specific retailers and industries that are driving the growth in our sales tax revenue. I would like to, we've shared some of that data with you. We'd love to maybe do a work session in the near future to share these findings. But the big takeaway is that our sales tax revenue projections that are both reflected in our adopted budget as amended today are likely to be sustained in the near future through the end of the calendar year. And we'll continue to see growth in sales tax revenue next year, again, because of this increase in population. The other thing is that as prices go up due to inflation, why the sales tax revenue goes up, and it scales with inflation. So the real risk of a recession is if the consumers themselves begin spending less. And if they do, then I suppose you could see a little bit of a leveling out of sales tax revenue. But as population's going up, well, you're going to have more of these people that are purchasing. So they may individually purchase a little bit less than they did previously, but if you got more of them purchasing things, and there's other demographic things in play that I think will yield sales tax revenue online trend with our projections. So I would say I don't know that you need to be particularly concerned about the big R word, the recession word, when it comes to specifically our sales tax revenues in this county. I think what we want to do is look at specifically what are those revenue projections, and do we think that those are solid projections. Of course, this is the reason we have a diverse revenue model for county government, where there's a blend of property taxes and sales taxes. And of course, we have new growth in property taxes that happens as more properties are built and developed in the county, which increases the total value of properties that exist to be taxed for property taxes. So those are some comments from the auditor's office vis-a-vis our revenue projections that I think go to some of the reasons for this proposal. And then I would just say that, yes, as a department head, I do think this is problematic because it slows down our ability to hire when we have vacancies and a need to hire certain spots. One example that our office deals a lot with is, of course, elections. We hire people on a part-time basis to work hourly in elections, and we have to be very nimble in the way that we respond to those needs based on the very needs of that particular election year and sometimes the particular election. So, for example, our staffing needs in the June primary are going to be different than the staffing needs in the November general election. And we need to be able to work with HR and nimbly hire people into our time-limited positions to staff. And of course, when we hire part-time people, they tend to quit from time to time because they don't see that as a permanent gig. It's not. And they may leave sooner than we were hoping, and then we have to backfill them. And so any slowing in the process that allows us to get positions staffed as we need them, I think would be a real operational concern for us. And so I see some concerns with the proposal for that reason. So that's what I would share. Thank you.
That was the longest 2 minutes I've ever seen. I don't know if Alice pushed the button or not.
I studied economics, not economy of words. Sorry.
That is true.
We should be fair and give 2 minutes on public.
I'm going to hold mine
comment.
to 1 minute. Is that okay?
Yeah.
1 minute based on the 2 minutes that we just heard. Chris Paulson, Utah County Assessor. It's interesting in this topic because there's so many perceptions and everyone's trying to predict what may happen based on what's going on. But I think everybody's accurate in their perception of what's going on because none of us really know, right? Even the experts are just predicting based on given variables that indicate this is what's happened in the past. as Commissioner Lee stated, I was also surprised when I heard the President of the United States say we had zero inflation in July. It was kind of hard to accept that based on everything else. We have one thing that we haven't talked about today, though, that the Auditor's Office has put in place. Starting this year, we've actually had meetings with Rudy and Samantha and members of the Auditor's Office, and we're having those every 2 to 3 months. And that seems like a vehicle or a tool to do exactly what you're thinking about here. We're in constant contact with the Auditor's Office or the budget, where we are with the budget and what's actually going on. And based on that, I think even with or without this proposal, we can use that vehicle to determine, should we be backing off as department heads from hiring, or should we continue on for the next 2 or 3 months? Because we're getting constant feedback between the Auditor's Office, who's monitoring all of our purchases. And you guys have to sign off on all the contracts. I think all the tools are already there. I think we just need to utilize what we already have. All the department heads are aware of what's going on, and they're aware that if they're in a position where they could come up short on funds even into the next year, that no one wants to lay off people, because we've done that in the past, and it's not a situation that makes anybody feel good. Everybody hates telling someone else you're about to lose their job. So I believe all the department heads are on board with monitoring, watching, and doing their jobs as far as making sure that we are managing the monies that the people of this county are providing to us to provide these services. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one.
Hi, Andrea Allen, County Recorder. I have some concerns, as well as everyone else, in what will happen if we do have to hold off on hiring, specifically for our department, where we just finally were able to get enough staff to become compliant, which we have been. The thoughts of now becoming non-compliant is very disheartening. We have fought hard for the budget that we had. We have managed those employees very well. We have made great strides. I have several positions open right now that are critical to my function to maintain that standard of being compliant. And we hired several people with the approval of this commission, and they've been working tremendously hard. They've done a great job. And then we've also had some who have left our employ for better circumstances for their families and them as individuals, because they have found a similar position that is more. We just recently recruited and interviewed, and all of those applicants, by the time the process was done, had other jobs, and the other jobs paid more money. So we were back at square one. And we had, a few positions to fill, great applicants, but by the time the process was complete to where we could offer a job, they already had other jobs. So adding the smallest additional step and or layer is going to be a real detriment to my process. And just thank you for your time, and would hope that this does not go through at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here in the chambers? Alice, do we have anybody online? No? Okay.
So we're bringing it back up here to the bench.
Yeah, we can bring it back up here to finish, and then.
So I hear those, it's interesting because in talking with Ralph and with Paul, as we kind of work down through this, some of those concerns came up, and One of them was an interesting one in the sense that, kind of going back to Josh's comment, maybe I think it was back in 2008 or whenever when they did this before, they went through and did some exemptions, and they exempted like grant funded. I can't remember. There was a whole list that we went through, which could easily be exempted out of it, just because of the concerns of speed that happen. And I think there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding. I really appreciate Chris's analysis with this through the process with the budget officer, in looking at that, and maybe there's an opportunity there for, maybe they would come to us and have some discussions with the commissioners a little more than because we see it from a different perspective, and it's not always the same as what the budget officer's looking at, and especially if we have a budget officer that's saying, well, we should probably hold off, now that's more of a policy decision than it is a budget officer's decision. But and I find it's kind of interesting because the slowing down of the process, I don't see that. I see it as, these are the positions that we have. It'd just be an email, and I get it. Somebody mentioned government being slow. Believe me, I know government is really super slow, and sometimes you're trying to get a hold of commissioners or whatever the case may be, and I see that. But with a little bit of foreknowledge with things that are going on, or even on blanket basis, if we're talking about staffing for part-time for election, it could be not just on an individual, but it could be on an open blanket and says, what about these? Would that be problematic? I can't see that ever being a problem to move forward with. And so as I'm looking at, and somebody mentioned the what ifs and what's going on and what might happen. We don't know. And I see this just being cautious as we do move forward. It is an option that, if the commission wanted next year, we could go off the standard rate and say, no, we're going to go through this rate. I'm not saying that's a good thing to do, but it is one of the options that the commission does have. And right now, things might not look as bad, but who knows what could happen. And I think as we do budgeting, obviously when we did our budgeting, we never anticipated that we were going to amend the budget to what we did today. I can't remember what the totals were, but it was like $7 million worth or more that had to be adjusted. And so when we say we're doing approvals, for staffing plans and for, the funding for that, we did that back then, and then today we actually adjusted that. So we voted for those things to happen, but then we adjusted for them today so that we could do them differently. And so for me, I don't see this as a bad thing. I know it's a different thing than what we've done in the past, but I personally don't see that as a negative.
Hey, Commissioner Sakovic, do you have anything to add before we go to a vote?
I do not.
Okay. I don't either. So do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve and authorize the commission to sign the resolution as stated in number 34 on our agenda.
Is there a second? All right, hearing no second, that motion dies. Do we have any general public comment? All right, seeing no general public comment, I will entertain a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
I can second that motion.
All right, we are adjourned.